Welcome back, my friend. The lamps are lit, the wind has quieted, and somewhere in the shadows the Niffler has found something shiny again. But this time, it's not gold. It's a story, and tonight, he's ready to share it with you. So settle in and listen closely. It begins like this.
The winter of 1978 had descended upon the Scottish Highlands with a ferocity that startled even the oldest residents of Hogsmeade. Snow had begun to fall as early as late November, shrouding the world in a dense, impenetrable blanket that seemed determined to bury not just the earth, but the very passage of time itself. Hogwarts Castle, majestic and unyielding, towered above the white expanses like a stone ship frozen in an endless sea of ice. Its windows glowed with warm, amber light, promising sanctuary and comfort, but beyond the ancient walls, where the dominion of wild nature began, entirely different laws prevailed. Rubeus Hagrid, who by then was firmly established as the keeper of keys and grounds at Hogwarts, awoke that morning long before dawn. In his small wooden cabin, huddled on the edge of the forbidden forest, a pleasant gloom reigned, diluted only by the dull glow of embers in the fireplace. The fire, which had crackled merrily the evening before, had now settled into a deep, pulsating breath of red heat, struggling against the icy fingers of winter that scratched persistently at the window panes. Hagrid swung his legs out of bed, and the floorboards creaked mournfully under his weight, breaking the perfect silence of the morning. He stretched, his enormous shadow cast against the wall, momentarily obscuring the bundles of dried herbs and copper pans hanging from the ceiling. "Budge up, Fang, ye great lump," he muttered in a voice thick with sleep, carefully stepping over a wicker basket beside the bed. A sleepy snort emerged from the basket, followed by the appearance of a large, slobbery snout. Fang was still just a puppy, clumsy, with paws that seemed far too big for his body, and a tail that lived a chaotic life of its own. The boarhound yawned, displaying an impressive set of teeth, and thumped his tail lazily against the floor in greeting, though he showed no inclination to leave his warm nest. Hagrid smiled into his thick, bushy black beard. He loved these early hours when the world still belonged only to him. The groundskeeper approached the window and wiped the fogged glass with a hand the size of a dustbin lid, trying to peer out at the grounds. But what he saw made him furrow his beetle-black brows. Usually, at this hour, even in the depths of winter, the forest was alive. One could hear the hooting of tawny owls, spot the tracks of foxes that had scurried beneath the castle walls, or catch a glimpse of mooncalves performing their final dance before sunrise. But today, a dead, motionless whiteness lay beyond the window. There was no wind to sway the tops of the fir trees. There were no snowflakes dancing in the air. The world seemed to have held its breath, afraid to disturb some fragile equilibrium. "Something's wrong," Hagrid whispered to himself. Too quiet, even for mid-December. He turned from the window and began to dress. His movements were habitual, honed by years of routine, pulling on a thick moleskin jumper, knitted by caring if somewhat unskilled hands, stepping into trousers made of moleskin that were tougher than any Muggle armor, and of course, throwing on the immense overcoat with its multitude of pockets, in which one could find anything from stale biscuits to a coil of rope or a handful of strange seeds. Taking his trusty crossbow, more for peace of mind than any real necessity, and hooking the ring of keys that jingled with every step to his belt, Hagrid pushed open the heavy oak door. The cold hit his face not like a wind but like a wall. It was a strange cold, dry, static, and devoid of scent. Winter air usually smelled of pine needles, smoke from the Hogwarts chimneys, and the dampness of snow. Today, the air smelled of nothing. It was sterile, like a ward at St. Mungo's, and that was more frightening than any stench. "Come on, Fang," Hagrid called. But the dog, having poked his nose over the threshold, gave a pathetic whine and backed away into the cabin, the hackles on his neck rising. Yeah, big coward." Hagrid chided him gently, though he felt an unpleasant chill settle somewhere beneath his heart. "All right, stay inside. Keep warm. I'll be back in a tick." He closed the door, leaving the dog in safety, and set off towards the forest. His massive boots usually left deep trenches in soft snow, creating a pleasant, reassuring sound. Crunch, crunch. But today, everything was different. The snow beneath his feet did not give way. It was hard as stone. Every step Hagrid took echoed with a strange, high-pitched sound, as if he were walking not on earth, but on a gigantic, taut string. Clink, clink, clink. The sound rang out through the frosty air for miles around, violating the absolute silence of the morning. Hagrid stopped and crouched to examine the ground. He pulled off a glove and touched the surface of the snow. It was smooth and slippery, yet not wet. It wasn't ice. The snowflakes hadn't melted and frozen again. They had simply hardened, retaining their shape, transforming into billions of tiny stone flowers. "Peculiar," Hagrid muttered, straightening up. "Never seen the like so this." Even when the Dementors came close to the castle, the cold was different. Damp, seeped into your bones. But this is older. He pressed on, delving deeper into the forbidden forest. The trees here stood densely packed, their black trunks stark against the whiteness of the ground. Usually the forest spoke to him. Old oaks creaked, dry leaves whispered, twigs snapped under the hooves of centaurs, or the legs of acromantulas deep in the thicket. But today, the forest was mute. It was the silence of an empty cathedral, the silence of a library where no one dared breathe. There were no birds. Not a single crow, not a solitary owl returning from a night's hunt. Even the small rodents whose tracks usually laced the snow had vanished. The forest seemed abandoned, or perhaps, which was far worse, it was holding itself still in anticipation of something terrible. Hagrid walked his usual path towards the Black Lake. He wanted to check the population of bowtruckles on the old willows near the water. But the further he went, the stranger his surroundings became. The air grew thick, viscous, like transparent treacle. Breathing became difficult, as if the oxygen were turning into fine glass dust that scratched at his lungs. Suddenly, he stopped dead in his tracks. The landscape ahead had changed. The section of the forest bordering the eastern bank of the lake looked as though someone had cast a terribly powerful stasis charm upon it. The trees here were not dusted with snow. They glowed. Hagrid approached the nearest tree cautiously, a sturdy elm that was at least 300 years old. Its bark, usually rough and dark, now glistened in the first rays of the rising sun. It had become translucent. Hagrid raised a hand, but hesitated to touch it. He could see dark veins inside the trunk, frozen sap, suspended life. The tree hadn't been covered in ice from the outside. It had turned to glass from the inside out. "Gallopin, Gorgons," breathed the groundskeeper. A cloud of white vapor escaped his mouth, and strangely, it didn't dissipate immediately, but slowly settled onto the ground as tiny crystals. He looked around. The entire clearing, the holly bushes, the tall grass poking through the snow, even the fallen leaves, everything had become glassy, crystalline, mineral. It was a beauty that made the blood run cold. It was the beauty of death. Every leaf was a work of art, every twig a masterpiece of a jeweler, but there was no life in it. Hagrid unhooked his axe from his belt. He didn't intend to chop the tree down, he merely wanted to test the strength of this material. Perhaps it was just an illusion, a prank by some 7th years who had learned new transfiguration spells. He tapped the blunt side of the axe lightly against a lower branch of the glass elm. Ping! The sound was so pure and loud that Hagrid flinched. It was the sound of metal striking the hardest mountain crystal. The axe bounced off, vibrating in his hand, leaving not even a scratch on the branch. On the contrary, a barely visible wave of pale blue light rippled from the point of impact, disappearing somewhere into the roots. "This ain't no student prank," Hagrid said grimly. His voice sounded hollow in this kingdom of glass. "This is old magic. Very old." He moved deeper into this anomalous zone. Walking was difficult. The grass under his boots didn't bend, it snapped with a melodious crunch, as if he were treading on scattered goblets. The sounds of his footsteps multiplied, bouncing off the glass trunks, creating the illusion that someone was following him. Hagrid spun around sharply several times, gripping his crossbow, but behind him stood only the motionless, transparent ghost trees. Suddenly, his peripheral vision caught movement. A shadow that wasn't made of glass. Something living and warm amidst the dead cold. "Who's there?" Hagrid bellowed. "Come out. I'm armed and—" "Well, just come out." From behind a cluster of petrified spruces, a figure stepped slowly. It was a centaur. Hagrid recognized him as Ronan, one of the most reclusive inhabitants of the forest. Centaurs usually stuck to the deep thickets and avoided humans, but Ronan looked as though he had been evicted from his own home. His chestnut coat looked dull against the glittering forest, his flanks heaving heavily, releasing clouds of steam. He looked exhausted, and, most uncharacteristically for the proud centaur race, frightened. He shifted his hooves nervously, trying not to step on the glass grass, keeping to a patch of ordinary earth that had miraculously survived. "Ronan," Hagrid lowered his crossbow. "What's going on here? Have ye seen this? The trees. They're like crystal." The centaur raised his sorrowful, deep eyes to the giant. He looked not at Hagrid but somewhere through him, as if reading inscriptions written on the air. "Mars is bright today," Ronan spoke in his low, vibrating voice. "But its light is cold. It does not warm. It only reflects. Listen, Ronan, never mind the stars." Hagrid stepped towards him, and the glass crunched beneath his boot again. The centaur flinched at the sound as if struck by a whip. "The forest is freezing. It's not just frost. It's a sickness. What do you know? Where's Bane? Where's Megorian?" Ronan swished his tail nervously. "The herd has gone north, to the caves in the mountains," he replied quietly. "The earth rejects us. Hooves hear no answer from the soil. The roots have fallen silent." They were afraid of the silence, Hagrid. "Centaurs do not run from enemies, but we run from emptiness." "Anne, you. Why did you stay?" "I listened." Ronan tilted his head, pressing an ear to a wind that wasn't there. "The dream has turned into a nightmare. He who sleeps beneath the roots is having bad dreams. And his dreams are becoming our reality." "Who sleeps?" Hagrid asked, feeling goosebumps race down his spine. "Who are ye talking about?" The centaur looked at the glass trees around them. In his eyes, fear mingled with awe. "This is not our war, groundskeeper. And not yours. This is a conversation between the earth and the sky that has been interrupted. Do not go there." He pointed a hand deep into the glass clearing, to where the trees stood thickest. "That is the heart of the nightmare. That is where the silence becomes a scream. Without waiting for an answer, Ronan turned and galloped away, his hooves clattering against the frozen earth. He moved quickly, as if afraid the glass sickness would catch him and turn him into a beautiful statue in the middle of the woods. "Wait, Ronan!" Hagrid called, but the centaur had already vanished into the mist. Left alone, Hagrid stood for a minute, hesitating. Reason told him to run to the castle, to Professor Dumbledore. This was a matter for powerful wizards, for those who knew complex spells and understood the mysteries of the universe. But his heart, Hagrid's heart, belonged to this forest. He knew every path, every burrow. If the forest was in pain, he couldn't just leave. "He who sleeps beneath the roots," he repeated the centaur's words. "Right then, looks like I'll have to look this sleepyhead in the eye." He turned in the direction Ronan had pointed and marched forward. Now he walked more carefully, trying not to break the fragile branches hanging low over the ground. The glass forest grew denser. The light here refracted in bizarre ways. Sunbeams shattered into thousands of rainbows that danced on the trunks, creating the illusion of movement. But it was a deception. Nothing moved here. Hagrid spotted a spiderweb stretched between two bushes. It too had become a silver wire, strong as steel. On it sat a spider, a small, ordinary garden spider. It had frozen, transformed into a tiny jewel. Hagrid blew gently on it, hoping the spider would move, but it remained a motionless monument to itself. "Poor blighter," the giant sighed. After walking another 100 yards, Hagrid emerged onto a wide clearing he knew well. In summer, bluebells bloomed here, and unicorns often rested. But now the clearing was changed beyond recognition. In its very center, where an ancient oak used to grow, the earth had split open. The oak was gone. Instead, a massive, jagged hole yawned, like a ragged wound in the body of the planet. The edges of the abyss were sharp as broken glass, and glowed with a faint, pulsating blue light coming from the depths. Hagrid, holding his breath, approached the edge of the precipice. He expected to smell sulfur or rot, as was common near the lairs of dark creatures. But this pit smelled of nothing. It wafted absolute, cosmic emptiness. It was the scent of the space between stars. And then he heard it. The sound. It was quiet, on the very edge of hearing, but it was felt not with ears, but with bones, with the diaphragm, with teeth. Thump-dum. A pause. A long, dragging silence. Thump-dum. It was a rhythm. A slow, impossibly heavy rhythm of a gigantic heart. With every beat, a barely perceptible vibration ran through the glass trees around, and crystal dust showered from the branches. Hagrid peered inside. The darkness below wasn't black. It was a deep, rich blue, thick, with floating particles of light resembling fairy dust. Steps, roughly hewn directly into the rock, or perhaps formed naturally, led down into the very belly of the earth. He realized this wasn't just a cave. It was an entrance into something so ancient that even Hogwarts seemed like a new build in comparison. "What a yay," Hagrid whispered, gripping his crossbow tighter with sweaty palms. Why have ye woken up now?" The sound of the heartbeat intensified. Thump-dum. From the depths came a sound like a heavy, painful moan, the sound of stone grinding against stone. And in that instant, the tree closest to the pit, a young birch, split in half with a resounding crack, shattering into thousands of sharp fragments. The glass sickness was spreading. And it was coming from here, from this abyss. Hagrid took a step back, then another. He was scared. But he understood he couldn't just run away. This was on his territory. This threatened his forest, his home, his school. He adjusted the collar of his coat, checked that his axe was in place, and, taking a deep breath, placed a foot on the first step leading into the blue abyss. "Hold tight, old man," he told himself, trying to make his voice sound cheerful. "It's just another cave. You've been in plenty worse. Main thing, don't slip." And the giant began his descent to where the heart of a forgotten world beat, unaware that every step was bringing him closer to a secret capable of changing the fate of the Forbidden Forest forever. And above his head on the surface the glass line slowly, inch by inch, crept towards the castle, transforming everything living into a cold, beautiful eternity. To descend into the unknown always begins with a single step, but for Rubeus Hagrid, that step felt like a leap into another dimension. The moment his massive boot touched the roughly hewn stone stair, the world above, a world of snow-laden firs, pale winter sun, and familiar skies, seemed to be severed by an invisible knife. The soundscape here was altogether different. Up on the surface, the ringing, taut silence of the glass forest had cut the ear with its unnaturalness. Here in the depths, the air was thick and alive. It vibrated. A low, rhythmic hum, like the purring of a gargantuan cat or the working of distant subterranean machinery, filled the space. Thump-dum, thump-dum. This sound was not merely heard with the ears. It resonated in the ribcage, echoed in the teeth, and forced the blood to course through veins in time with this primordial rhythm. The stairs Hagrid was descending were cut directly into the bedrock. They were broad enough even for a giant, which was strange in itself. Usually, dungeons created by wizards or goblins were scaled to human height. The goblins of Gringotts built narrow, twisting tunnels to protect their treasures. The founders of Hogwarts preferred majestic, yet human proportions. These stairs, however, were carved for someone who took long, heavy strides, for someone who did not fear the dark, but was a part of it. The tunnel walls were neither damp nor covered in mold, as the groundskeeper had expected. They were dry and warm to the touch, and most astonishingly, they glowed. A dim, blue phosphorescence emanated not from torches or magical lamps, but from the stone itself. Thin veins of minerals pulsed in time, with the heartbeat echoing from below, creating the impression that Hagrid was descending the esophagus of some colossal living beast. "Easy now, Hagrid," he whispered, and his voice was strangely absorbed by the walls, producing no echo. "Just keep going." Step by step. The deeper he descended, the more the air changed. The scent of frost and sterility vanished. Instead, an aroma arose that Hagrid could not immediately identify, though it seemed painfully familiar. It smelled of wet earth after a summer storm, of bracken crushed in the palm, of ozone and something metallic, like the tang of blood on a split lip. It was the scent of life itself, concentrated and thick, but laced with a note of sickness, of bitterness. The stairs curled in a wide spiral, and Hagrid lost track of time. Perhaps 10 minutes had passed, perhaps an hour. He felt the air pressure rising, popping his ears. Finally, after one last turn, the tunnel ended abruptly, and Hagrid froze on the threshold, struck dumb by the majesty of the tableau that opened before him. He stood upon a stone ledge overhanging a cavern of immense proportions, a grotto so vast that the Great Hall of Hogwarts, towers and all, could easily have fit inside. But this was no mere empty dungeon. It was a temple of nature, hidden from human eyes. The ceiling of the cave was lost in darkness, but from it hung the roots of the forbidden forest trees, like gigantic chandeliers. Here, underground, they looked different, thick knotted tangles stretching downwards, and through them, like blood through arteries, flowed a glowing blue substance, the earth magic nourishing the forest above. The walls of the grotto were covered in carvings. These were not the neat Latin letters of wizards, nor the sharp, aggressive runes of goblins. They were rough, simple symbols, yet full of power: spirals, circles, wavy lines reminiscent of river currents or the rings of a tree. Hagrid had never studied ancient languages, but looking at these signs, he intuitively understood their meaning: growth, sleep, protection, memory. But all of this, the glowing roots and the inscribed walls, was merely a backdrop for what lay in the center of the cave. There, on a stone island surrounded by the black still water of a subterranean lake, he slept. The Guardian. Hagrid had seen dragons. He had raised Norbert, seen majestic Hebridean blacks and Hungarian horntails. He knew what power looked like, but the creature before him was something else entirely. This was not an animal, it was an element given form. The Guardian was gargantuan. Lying down, he loomed like a hill. His body consisted of an interweaving of stone, ice, ancient timber, and earth. His shoulders were boulders covered in moss that glowed in the gloom. His hands were thick, knobbly root systems ending in fingers of pure crystal. The creature's head resembled the helm of an ancient knight hewn from rock, but instead of a visor, there was a face, rough, stern, as if molded from clay by the world's first sculptor. The Guardian's eyes were closed, and from his lips escaped a breath that turned into mist. Gallopin, Gorgons. Hagrid breathed, forgetting caution. So you're real. Mum used to tell us ales a boo. The Stone Fathers. But I thought... Thump-dum. The heartbeat came from here. From the center of this creature's chest. But now, up close, Hagrid saw something that made his own heart clench with pity. The Guardian was not sleeping peacefully. His body shuddered, stone muscles tensed, and the roots entwining his torso pulsed with a sickly rhythm. He moaned. This sound, which on the surface was perceived as the rumble of the earth, here sounded like the pain-filled sigh of a living being. Every groan of the Guardian was accompanied by a flash of light in the roots overhead, and Hagrid realized the terrible pattern. Every time the creature hurt, the magic flowing up to the forest changed. It became hard, cold, crystalline. He wasn't turning the forest to glass out of malice. He was doing it out of pain. His agony was becoming a curse for the world above. Hagrid began to descend towards the lake. The path here was narrow, and he had to walk sideways, pressing his back against the warm runes on the wall. Reaching the water's edge, he realized there was no crossing. The black water looked deep and oily. "Gotta get closer," he muttered. "Gotta see what's wrong with him." He looked around and spotted several flat stones protruding from the water, forming a precarious path to the island. For an ordinary human, the distance between them would have been too great, but for a half-giant, it was just one wide stride. Hagrid stepped onto the first stone. It wobbled but held his weight. The second, the third. The water around was strange. It didn't splash. It was thick, like mercury. When Hagrid reached the island, he felt the temperature shift. It was hot here. Heat radiated from the Guardian, but it wasn't the heat of fire, it was the heat of a fever. He approached the giant's head carefully, trying not to make sudden movements. Up close he saw that the creature's skin was bark mixed with granite. In the crevices between the scales of bark lived tiny creatures, glowing beetles that scattered at Hagrid's approach. "Easy, big fella, easy," Hagrid whispered in his trademark soothing tone, the one he used for frightened hippogriffs. "I won't hurt you. I'm a friend." I'm from the forest." The guardian didn't wake, but his eyelids fluttered. A beam of blinding blue light escaped from beneath stone lashes and instantly vanished. Hagrid shifted his gaze to the creature's chest, to where the heart should be, and recoiled in horror. There, amidst the tangle of roots and stone, protruded something alien. It was a shard. It looked like a piece of black, jagged metal, the size of a good sword. But it wasn't just metal. It absorbed light. The blue glow of the cave, upon hitting this object, disappeared, as if sucked into a black hole. Around the shard, the guardian's body was turning black. The flesh was rotting, turning into black dust, and from the wound oozed not blue magic but a dark, viscous liquid resembling tar. "Dark magic," Hagrid hissed, feeling the hair on the back of his neck stand up. The smell near the wound was unbearable. It smelled of burnt rubber and sulfur. "This ain't natural. Someone, or somewhat, did this to ye." He recalled Dumbledore's stories of old wars, of a time when wizards experimented with forces they didn't understand. Perhaps this shard had lain in the earth for centuries, waiting for its time, or perhaps a recent landslide had brought this garbage of the past straight to the heart of the forest. The guardian moaned again. His massive hand clenched into a fist, and the stone creaked. A wave ran through the roots overhead, and somewhere above, Hagrid was certain, another acre of forest turned into dead glass. "You hurtin'?" Hagrid's eyes filled with tears. He couldn't bear to watch any living creature suffer, and the suffering of such majesty felt like a crime against nature. "I gotta get it out. Just a mo. Hold on." Hagrid took off his overcoat, remaining in his moleskin waistcoat. He set aside his crossbow. Weapons were useless here. Here hands and strength were needed. He stepped right up to the wound. The heat from the black shard was unbearable, but it was a cold heat. It burned with frost. Hagrid spat on his palms, rubbed them together, and firmly gripped the black metal protruding from the giant's chest with both hands. On 3, he commanded himself. 1, 2, 3. He tensed every muscle. His back, accustomed to hauling sacks of thestral feed and carrying tree trunks, went rigid as a steel cable. His biceps swelled with power, but the shard didn't budge. Instead, disaster struck. The moment Hagrid pulled, the guardian screamed. It wasn't a vocal scream. It was a mental blow. A wave of pure pain and panic hit Hagrid in the chest, throwing him back several yards. He landed hard on the stones, painfully jarring his shoulder. But that wasn't the worst of it. The wound flared with black fire. The shard vibrated, digging itself deeper, like a living parasite unwilling to leave its host. In response, the guardian's body released a defensive pulse. Ping! The air in the cave instantly crystallized. The cloud of steam hanging over the lake turned into a hail of sharp ice needles that rained down. The roots on the ceiling, the very arteries of the forest, instantly turned white. Hagrid watched in horror as, right before his eyes, living, pulsating roots transformed into hard, transparent quartz. The process was happening with terrifying speed. "No!" he shouted, scrambling to his feet. "No! No! I'm making it worse!" He realized his mistake. The shard wasn't just stuck. It had fused with the Guardian's magic. To rip it out by force meant ripping out a piece of the creature's heart. It would kill the Guardian, and the death of the Guardian meant the instant death of the entire Forbidden Forest. The trees wouldn't just turn to glass, they would crumble into dust. The Guardian was breathing heavily, calming down after the flare of pain, but now his breathing was rasping. The blue veins on his body had dimmed. "I'm sorry," Hagrid whispered, clutching his bruised shoulder. He felt helpless, more so than ever before. His physical strength, of which he had always been proud, was useless here. Even harmful. I'm a fool. An old fool. It's not strength needed here. It's knowledge. He looked at the dark metal. It was like a splinter in a finger that had festered. To draw out a splinter, the skin needs to be softened, soothed. The body needs to be made to reject the foreign object itself. Dumbledore. Hagrid spoke into the darkness. Only he knows what this black filth is. He looked one last time at the suffering Titan. I'll come back, he promised firmly. You hear me? I won't leave ye. I'll bring medicine. Just hold on. Don't go to sleep forever. The climb back up was horrific. If the descent had been a journey into wonder, the return was a flight from catastrophe. The air in the tunnel had become thin and prickly. The walls, which had previously glowed with soft blue light, now flickered with an alarming stroboscopic rhythm, like a light bulb about to blow. Hagrid scrambled up the stairs, taking them two at a time, gasping for breath. His lungs burned as if he were inhaling crushed glass. It felt as though the cave behind him was trying to suck him back in, or to seal the entrance, burying the secret under tons of rock. When he finally saw daylight, a pale patch of the exit above, he almost collapsed from exhaustion, but forced himself to make one last lunge. He tumbled out of the pit onto the clearing and fell face first into the snow. But the snow wasn't soft. He hit a hard, cold surface. Hagrid lifted his head and groaned. While he had been below, the sickness had progressed. The clearing had changed. Now it wasn't just a glass forest. It was a chaos of sharp angles and mirrored surfaces. The grass had become like dagger blades. Bushes had turned into tangles of crystal barbed wire. But the most terrifying sight lay ahead. Hagrid rose to his knees and looked towards the castle. From this hill, the towers of Hogwarts were visible. And what he saw made his blood run colder than any frost. The wave of vitrification was moving. It was rolling over the forest like a slow tsunami. Trees were changing color from green and brown to transparent white, right before his eyes. Clink, clink, clink rang through the forest, like millions of invisible bells announcing the approach of disaster. The line of transformation had already passed the clearing with the Thestrals. It had crossed the path where Hagrid usually walked Fang. And now, it was relentlessly approaching the stone wall that enclosed the school grounds. It's common for the children, Hagrid whispered. He imagined what would happen if that wave touched the castle. Would the stone walls turn to crystal? Would the portraits freeze in their frames? Would the students currently eating breakfast in the Great Hall turn into beautiful motionless statues with living eyes? He remembered the Guardian's scream. His pain was so intense he couldn't control his magic. And that magic was seeking an outlet. Gotta hurry. Hagrid stood up, ignoring the pain in his shoulder and his fatigue. Gotta get to the headmaster. He ran. His heavy boots thudded against the glass earth, leaving a web of cracks behind. He ran faster than he ever had in his life, and around him the forest rang, singing its farewell, crystalline song. The sun was dipping below the horizon, painting the transparent trees a blood-red color, and to Hagrid, it seemed the whole world was turning into a fragile Christmas ornament that was about to fall and shatter into smithereens. The run of a giant is a phenomenon that can rarely be called graceful, but it always possesses an unstoppable primal power, akin to the movement of an avalanche or a mountain torrent. Rubeus Hagrid, forgetting his fatigue and the searing pain in his bruised shoulder, hurtled up the slope, leaving a trail of ice dust and debris in his wake. His breath tore from his chest in raspy clouds of steam that instantly froze in the frigid air, but he did not stop. The forest around him was dying. Or rather, it was transitioning into another state of being. a state of eternal, cold perfection. The sound accompanying this process was like the endless chiming of thousands of crystal goblets being clinked at a banquet of ghosts. Clink, clink, clink. An oak branch that Hagrid rushed past suddenly turned white and transformed into glass right before his eyes. He barely managed to dodge to avoid shattering it with his shoulder. It was now as sharp as a razor blade. Ahead, through the lace of frozen treetops, the lights of the castle were already visible. Hogwarts stood unshakable, but the line of the glass sickness had already crept up to the very walls. The stonework of the outer wall had begun to coat with rime that looked unnatural. It didn't melt, but bit into the stone, rendering it transparent. Not the children, Hagrid wheezed, leaping over the fence of the pumpkin patch, where his beloved vegetables had already turned into orange spheres of ice. Not the castle. He burst into the side doors of the entrance hall, nearly tearing them off their hinges. The warmth of the castle hit him in the face, but even here, in the corridors, anxiety was palpable. The torches burned dimmer than usual, and the portraits on the walls whispered, glancing fearfully out the windows. Hagrid didn't wait for permission. He didn't take the moving staircases, too slow. He ran straight through, taking stairs 3 at a time, ignoring the indignant shouts of Peeves, who tried to pelt him with chalk. By the gargoyle guarding the entrance to the headmaster's office, he didn't even pause to catch his breath. "Sherbet lemon!" He barked the password so loudly that the stone monster leaped aside in fright before he had even finished the phrase. The spiral staircase carried him up, and he flew into Albus Dumbledore's office, bringing with him the smell of frost, ozone, and his own fear. Silence reigned in the office, contrasting sharply with the chaos outside. Silver instruments whirred and clicked, names of which Hagrid could never remember. Portraits of former headmasters snoozed softly, and Fawkes slumbered on his perch. The phoenix opened one eye, looked at the snow-covered giant, and let out a soft, soothing sound. Dumbledore was standing by the window. He was looking at the forest. His long silver beard was perfectly combed, and in his hands he held a cup of tea, from which a thin stream of steam rose. It seemed he had been waiting for this visit. "Professor," Hagrid gasped, leaning heavily with his hands on his knees. Meltwater dripped from his overcoat onto the carpet. "The forest. It's turning to glass. And down there, the garden. He's wounded." Dumbledore turned slowly. In his blue eyes behind the half-moon spectacles, there was no fear, only a deep, focused gravity. "I feel it, Hagrid," he said quietly. His voice was as calm as the surface of a lake on a windless day, and it somewhat quelled the groundskeeper's panic. "Ancient magic has awoken. The earth is screaming. Did you see him?" "I saw him, Professor. He's there, under the roots. Enormous, made of stone and wood. In his chest," Hagrid faltered, searching for words. "There's black metal sticking out, like a shard of a sword or a spear. It's poisoning him. I tried to pull it out, but it only got worse. He nearly killed me with cold, and Carter, the forest started turning to glass even faster." Dumbledore set his cup on the desk and approached Hagrid. He placed his uninjured hand on the giant's elbow. "You were wise to stop," said the headmaster. "What you describe is a shard of cursed iron. An echo of the giant wars, or perhaps even older times. Dark magic of that sort acts like an anchor. It latches onto life and turns pain into a weapon." "So what do we do?" Hagrid asked in despair. If we don't help him, he'll destroy everything. The castle walls are already freezing. We cannot cut it out by force. Dumbledore walked to one of the cabinets and retrieved an old, tattered scroll. The Guardian is not merely a creature, he is in essence the embodied soul of this place. If we cause him pain, the forest will die with him. We must act differently. Darkness is not driven out by darkness, Hagrid. Cold is not cured by a blade. He unrolled the scroll on the desk. It was a map, but not like the ones in textbooks. It was alive. Mountains on it breathed, and rivers flowed. We need to melt the ice around the wound, Dumbledore explained, tracing a long finger across the map. But ordinary fire will not help here. Even the magical Gubrathian fire would be too crude. We need living warmth, warmth born of the earth itself, but capable of healing, not destroying. Hagrid frowned, peering at the map. Living warmth. Professor, do you mean? Fire moss. Dumbledore finished for him. Bryum ignis, a rare plant that grows in only one place within 100 miles. Hagrid felt everything inside him go cold, and it had nothing to do with the temperature outside. He knew the place. Anyone who walked the Forbidden Forest further than a mile had heard of it, but few dared approach. The hot spring o' sorrow, he whispered. Deep in the thicket, where the earth is split. But Professor, that's Acromantula territory. They hunt there. Aragog said even his children don't like going near the water itself, 'cause it's too dangerous. That is precisely why I cannot send anyone else. Dumbledore looked Hagrid straight in the eye. In that gaze was both a command and boundless trust. I must remain here in the castle. I will have to cast barrier charms around the school to hold back the glass wave and buy you time. Only my magic can slow the Guardian without killing him. And you know the forest better than anyone. You know the spiders. And you have a heart that knows no fear when it comes to saving others. Hagrid straightened up. The fear vanished. Its place was taken by determination. He was the gamekeeper. This was his job. What do I got to do with this moss? Collect it, Dumbledore said quickly. But remember, it is hot as coal. You will need something to carry it in. And hurry, Hagrid. The barrier will hold for no more than an hour. If you do not return by then, the Guardian will wake fully, and then eternal winter will fall upon Hogwarts. The forest greeted Hagrid with hostility. If before it had been simply quiet and glassy, now, in the depths of the thicket, it seemed like a living labyrinth trying to stop the intruder. Branches grabbed at his clothes. Thorny undergrowth, transformed into glass, tore at his skin, even through the thick fabric of his trousers. Hagrid didn't follow paths. There were none here. He forged his way by force, breaking icy barriers with his body. He moved southeast, to where the terrain became more difficult, where hills gave way to deep ravines. The zone of the glass anomaly here was uneven. Some sections of the forest had already turned into transparent mineral. Others still held on, resisting the Guardian's magic. It created a bizarre mosaic. A green pine stood next to a crystal birch, and a living brook flowed into a frozen, still lake. The closer he got to Acromantula territory, the thicker the fog became. But this was not a cold fog. It was warm and humid, with a heavy smell of sulfur. That meant the spring was close. Suddenly, Hagrid stopped. His sensitive ear caught a sound that could not be confused with anything else. A dry, rhythmic clicking. Click, click, click. From the darkness between the trees, several pairs of eyes emerged. They glowed with a dull, sinister shine. "Who goes there?" hissed a voice that sounded like rustling dry leaves. A spider the size of a small pony crawled onto the path. Its chitin was covered in stiff black bristles, and its pincers clicked impatiently. Behind it, more shadows stirred in the gloom. "It's me, Hagrid," the groundskeeper bellowed, not lowering his crossbow, though he knew it would be of little help against a swarm. "Back off. I need to get to the hot spring." The spider froze. "Hagrid," it hissed, "friend of Aragog, but Aragog sleeps, and we are hungry. The cold took our prey. The deer became stone. The boars became glass. We want warm blood." "Don't touch me," Hagrid warned, and a growl akin to a bear's rumbled in his voice. "I'm going to save the forest. If I don't pass, you'll all turn into glass statues. Is that what ye want? For the cold to take you too?" The spiders hesitated. They felt the vibration of the earth, felt the wrongness of the world. The instinct for self-preservation battled within them against hunger. "Pass." The leader finally clicked, backing into the darkness. "But if you do not bring back the warmth, we will come for you." Hagrid didn't wait for a second invitation. He lunged forward, tearing through thick webs that stuck to his face and hands. A few minutes later, he felt the temperature shift. The air became hot, heavy. The snow underfoot vanished, replaced by black, wet mud. The trees parted, and he stepped out onto the edge of a massive depression. This was the hot spring of sorrow. The sight was phantasmagorical. In the middle of winter and a glass forest, life boiled, literally. A huge natural bowl was filled with water that churned and steamed. A thick cloud of white vapor hung over the surface. But the most amazing thing was what surrounded the water. The glass sickness was trying to capture this place too. The edges of the spring were rimmed with sharp ice teeth. The Guardian's magic fought against the Earth's natural heat. Ice crept onto the boiling water, hissed, melted, and froze again. Line. It was an eternal battle of elements. And in the very center of the spring, on a small rocky islet that was periodically washed by waves of boiling water, grew what Hagrid sought. Fire moss. It glowed with its own inner light, bright orange, pulsating like molten lava. It looked as though the stone was covered in a carpet of embers. "Rye then," Hagrid said, wiping sweat from his brow. "It was as hot as an oven here. Didn't plan on going for a swim, but I got no choice." He looked around, searching for a way to cross. The stones were slippery with moisture and algae. It was too far to jump. He would have to wade. Hagrid took off his boots and socks, rolled up his trousers. He pulled a thick leather glove, dragon hide, the best protection against burns, and a metal cauldron from his bag. The first step into the water made him grunt through clenched teeth. The water wasn't just hot. It was on the verge of boiling. The skin on his legs instantly turned red. But Hagrid, gritting his teeth, marched forward. "Bear it, old man. Bear it," he muttered. Norbert bit harder. Fluffy scratched worse. "It's just water. A hot bath." Every step was a battle. The bottom was uncertain. Muddy. Bubbles of gas rose from the depths, bursting with the smell of sulfur. Hagrid reached the middle. The water was already at his waist. The heat was unbearable. His head was spinning. Finally, he reached the islet. He clambered onto the hot stone, breathing heavily. Up close, the fire moss looked even more wondrous. Its filaments moved like living tongues of flame. Such heat radiated from it that Hagrid felt it even through his wet clothes. He pulled on the dragonhide glove and carefully, trying not to damage the roots, began scooping the glowing substance into the cauldron. The moss hissed at the touch, as if protesting being disturbed. "Sorry, little fella, sorry," Hagrid whispered. "You're needed for a big job. You're gonna save your big brother." He filled the cauldron to the brim, clamped the lid on tight. The metal instantly heated up so much it was impossible to touch with a bare hand, and tied it to his belt. "Now back, quick!" But the moment he stepped into the water to return, the earth convulsed. It wasn't just a tremor. It was a spasm. The water level in the spring jumped sharply, covering Hagrid with a wave of boiling water over his head. He surfaced, sputtering, and barely kept his footing. A rumble came from underground. That same sound thumped him, but now it was frantic, arrhythmic. The Guardian was waking up. Hagrid looked at the shore and saw a horrific sight. The trees around the spring, which a minute ago had been ordinary pines, began to explode. They didn't just turn to glass, they shattered into splinters from the excess pressure of magic. Ice fragments, sharp as daggers, rained down into the water. "Oh no!" Hagrid roared, fighting his way to the shore through the churning water. "Not now. Hold on. I'm comin'." The ground beneath his feet was shaking violently. The slope of the ravine began to slide into the spring. Hagrid leaped onto the bank, snatched up his boots without even putting them on, and ran barefoot back into the forest. But the forest had changed. The path he had come by was gone. In its place had grown a wall of solid, opaque crystal 10 feet high. The earth cracked, and from the fissures erupted blue light that froze everything in its path. Hagrid realized there was no way back. At least, no ordinary way. He pressed the hot cauldron of moss to his chest, the only source of warmth in this mad world, and looked up at the castle, which was barely visible through the haze of the magical storm. Dumbledore's barrier shimmered over the towers like a golden dome, but cracks were already running through it. There was no time left. The Guardian was screaming in his agony, and his scream was breaking the world into pieces. "Rye then," Hagrid rasped, eyeing the insane obstacle. "If ye can't go through the forest, ye gotta go through the wall." He took a run up and with all his gigantic body slammed into the glass wall, shattering it into thousands of shards, carving a path with his own blood and strength, for he knew, if he stopped even for a moment, the Song of Forgotten Times would be the last song of Hogwarts. The return to the cave became a trial that bordered on madness for Hagrid. He didn't remember how he covered the last mile of the forest, which had turned into a labyrinth of sharp, deadly glass. His overcoat was torn in several places, the skin on his arms grazed by tiny cuts, and his bare feet, scalded by the waters of the spring, were now numb from contact with the frozen earth. But he felt no pain. The only thing he felt was the pulsating heat from the cauldron of fire moss pressed against his chest, and the weight of responsibility pressing down on his shoulders, heavier than any boulder. When he reached the fissure, the world around him had almost lost its color. The sky had turned a flat gray-white, the trees transparent, and the air itself seemed to have frozen in anticipation of the end. The protective dome created by Dumbledore over the castle shimmered in the distance, like a soap bubble in frost, and Hagrid could see dark cracks running across its surface. Time had almost run out. He didn't bother descending the stairs. They were coated in a sheet of ice and looked like a slippery slide into the abyss. Hagrid simply sat on the edge, clutched the cauldron tighter, and slid down, breaking with his heels and back. The darkness of the underground greeted him not with silence, but with a roar. The Guardian was thrashing in agony. The sound thump-dum had turned into a chaotic, ragged rhythm, akin to the rumble of a rock fall. The blue light that had previously pulsed softly on the walls now flared in sharp, blinding flashes of lightning. Stalactites on the ceiling trembled, and from time to time stone icicles broke loose, crashing into the black water of the subterranean lake with the sound of cannon shots. Hagrid scrambled heavily to his feet at the bottom. It was cold here, so cold that even his giant blood, accustomed to harsh winters, began to chill. It was the absolute zero of the magical world, a cold that sucked out hope. "I'm here," he roared, shouting over the rumble. "I came back. Don't ye dare give up." He stepped onto the stone islands, leading to the center. The water in the lake had begun to freeze. A thick crust of ice was forming over the black, oily liquid right before his eyes, creeping onto the island where the Guardian lay, trying to shackle him completely. When Hagrid neared the elemental, he recoiled. The black stain around the shard in the creature's chest had spread. It now covered almost the entire torso of the giant. Stone and wood were rotting, turning into black ash, and tentacles of dark energy lashed out from the wound, whipping the air like scourges. The Guardian noticed Hagrid's approach. His massive head turned, and stone eyelids opened. But in the blue eyes, there was no longer wisdom or peace, only the mad pain and fear of a cornered beast. He swung a colossal root hand, trying to shove away the small, in comparison to him, figure approaching. "No!" shouted Hagrid, holding his ground. The blow was terrible. The stone palm slammed into Hagrid, throwing him backwards. He fell, nearly dropping the precious cauldron, but at the last moment curled up and shielded it with his body. The blow would have broken the spine of an ordinary man, but Hagrid was a half-giant. His bones were tougher than steel, and his skin possessed a natural resistance to magical attacks. He shook his head, spitting blood from a split lip, and stood up again. "Yeah, won't drive me away," he growled, marching forward once more. "I'm stubborner than you, ye great stone blockhead." This time he moved slower. He began to speak. Not shouting, but speaking in that special, low tone that vibrated in his very diaphragm. "Easy. Easy now, old fella. I know it hurts. I know it burns. But I brought medicine. I brought the warmth of the earth." The Guardian froze. He listened. Hagrid's voice was not just sound, it was a vibration, akin to the hum of mountains. Hagrid walked right up to the Titan's chest. The heat from the cauldron and the cold from the wound met, creating a vortex of steam and snow around them. He set the cauldron on the stone, removed the lid. The bright orange light of the fire moss illuminated the cave, casting long, bizarre shadows. The moss pulsed like living coals. "This is gonna sting a bit," Hagrid warned, pulling off his protective glove. "But it'll get better after." He did something few would dare. He plunged his bare hands into the cauldron, scooping up handfuls of the red-hot, burning moss. His palms sizzled, the skin turned red, but he paid it no mind. The heat of the moss mixed with the heat of his own blood, with his life force. Hagrid abruptly pressed this burning mixture against the Guardian's wound, right around the black metal shard. The reaction was instantaneous. The Guardian arched his back, and a sound erupted from his chest that seemed to crack the very foundation of the world. It was a scream, but a scream of release. "Hold on," Hagrid shouted, pressing the moss with all his might. Don't let go, the black metal hissed. Under the influence of the concentrated natural energy of the fire moss and the warmth of the half-giant's hands, the dark magic began to retreat. It couldn't withstand the purity of this fire. The black tar boiled and began to evaporate as grey smoke. The metal, which had been cold as death, began to glow red. And here Hagrid realized that physical action alone was not enough. The Guardian was still tense, his magic still chaotic. The very soul of the creature needed soothing. And then Hagrid sang. It wasn't a song in the usual sense of the word. He knew no notes and had no ear for music. It was an old, very old song he had heard in childhood from his mother, Fridwulfa. Giants didn't sing words. They hummed. It was a deep, guttural sound, rhythmic and monotonous, like the sound of wind in a gorge or the roll of distant thunder. Oh mmm. Oh mmm. He closed his eyes and poured everything he had into that sound. His love for the forest, his care for every living thing, his loneliness and his strength. His voice filled the cave. It bounced off the walls, entering into resonance with the Guardian's heartbeat. Thumpdum began to slow, adjusting to the rhythm of Hagrid's song. The elemental stopped thrashing. His stone muscles relaxed. The blue light in his eyes became soft, steady. He understood. He felt that the being before him was not an enemy, not a small human, but a brother in spirit. Just as big, just as lonely, just as strong. The shard in the Guardian's chest began to wobble. The bond of dark magic with the elemental's body was severed by the warmth and the song. Hagrid opened his eyes. His face was wet with sweat and tears, his beard matted. There now, he rasped. Now let's say goodbye to this filth. He gripped the red-hot shard with one hand, right by the blade. His skin smoked, but he didn't let go. 1. He pulled. The Guardian exhaled a cloud of steam. 2. The earth shuddered one last time. 3. Hagrid yanked towards himself with all his might, putting the full power of his giant heritage into the motion. With a sickening screech, like the sound of a nail being ripped from old wood, the black shards slid out of the Guardian's body. Hagrid flew backwards, clutching the piece of metal in his hand, and landed on the stones. The shard in his hand instantly began to crumble into ash. Deprived of the sustenance from the Guardian's suffering, it could not exist. Silence. Absolute, blessed silence fell upon the cave. No more rumbling, no more screeching. And then the Guardian took a deep, slow breath. The air in the cave changed instantly. The biting cold vanished, replaced by the pleasant coolness of the underground. The blue glow of the walls became bright and stable. The wound on the elemental's chest began to close. Stone and wood fused together, sealing the hole, and where the burns from dark magic had been, young green shoots of moss began to push through. The Guardian slowly turned his head towards Hagrid, who lay on his back, breathing heavily. A massive stone hand reached out to him. Hagrid didn't flinch. The elemental's finger, as thick as the trunk of a young oak, gently, with incredible tenderness, touched the groundskeeper's chest, right where his own heart beat. A voice sounded in Hagrid's head, not words, but images, rustling leaves, warmth of the sun, scent of rain, gratitude, sleep. Hagrid smiled, stroking the rough finger. Sleep, friend. Everything's all right now. Winter will come, but it'll just be winter, not death. The Guardian closed his eyes. His breathing evened out, becoming deep and sparse, one breath per century. He became part of the rock again, part of the foundation of the world. Up above, in the forest, a miracle was unfolding. At the exact moment Hagrid ripped out the shard, the glass sickness stopped an inch from the castle wall. And then the process went in reverse. With a sharp, melodious sound, like the chiming of thousands of crystal bells, the glass began to transform. Crystal bark became dark timber. Ice needles turned into soft pine needles. Glass grass became green and pliable beneath the snow once more. Birds, frozen in flight or on branches, shook themselves, scattering snow, and chirped in surprise, not understanding why the world around them had suddenly changed. The snow, which had been hard as stone, softened. The forest exhaled. Dumbledore, standing by the window of his office, lowered his wand. A bead of sweat trickled down his forehead, but his eyes shone. He watched the golden barrier dissipate, and the forest below become alive, dark, and mysterious once again. "Thank you, Rubeus," he whispered into the empty office. "I knew you could do it." 3 days passed. It was warm again in Hagrid's cabin. The fire blazed. The kettle on the hob whistled merrily, releasing clouds of steam smelling of mint and some healing herbs. On the table sat a massive plate of rock cakes, this time perhaps slightly less rocky than usual, and a mug of tea the size of a bucket. Hagrid sat in his armchair, covered with a blanket. His hands were heavily bandaged, and his fingers smelled of dittany and honey. Fang lay at his feet, resting his heavy head on his master's boots, occasionally snoring and twitching his paws in his sleep. There was a quiet knock at the door. "Come in, it's open," Hagrid called, trying to stand, but the door opened, and Albus Dumbledore appeared on the threshold. The headmaster was wearing long robes the color of the midnight sky, dusted with real soft snow. Sit, Hagrid." He waved a hand, entering and closing the door behind him, cutting off the howling wind. "You need rest. I just stopped by to check on your hands." "Ah, what's to check, Professor?" Hagrid said bashfully, hiding his bandaged palms under the table. "Healin' like a dog's, they are. Madame Pomfrey says I'll be good as new in a week." Dumbledore sat on a chair, which creaked dangerously beneath him but held, and looked intently at the groundskeeper. "You saved Hogwarts, Hagrid. Again." "Ah, I just, cleared up some rubbish," the giant muttered, blushing so deeply his face blended with the color of his beard. "You were holding the barrier. I just had a chat with Ian Eam. He's a good sort, Professor, that guardian. He was just very lonely and in pain." "That is where your strength lies," Dumbledore said seriously. "Most wizards, even the most powerful, would have tried to fight him, or put him to sleep by force. You chose a different path. You shared his pain." The headmaster pulled a small package, wrapped in silver paper, from his pocket. "I brought you something, from the kitchens. The elves said it's a special recipe for rapid recovery of strength. Eclairs with dragon milk cream." Hagrid's eyes lit up. "Oh, thank you, Professor." Dumbledore stood and walked to the window. Beyond the glass, thick, quiet snow was falling. The forest stood as a dark wall, calm and majestic. "Ronan asked me to pass on his regards," he said without turning. "The centaurs have returned. They say the earth is singing the right song again, and they know who gave it back its voice." Hagrid sniffed and wiped his eyes with the healthy part of his arm. "I'll keep an eye on him, Professor, the Guardian. Once a month I'll go down, check on things, bring him somewhat. Dunno, maybe just sit nearby, so he knows he ain't alone." "I do not doubt it," Dumbledore smiled, turning to the door. "Good night, Hagrid, and thank you for the warmth. In this cold world, it is often lacking." When the door closed behind the headmaster, Hagrid sat for a long time, staring into the fire. His hands still ached, but it was a good ache, the ache of work done right. He looked out the window, towards the forest. Somewhere out there, deep beneath the roots, slept the gigantic heart of nature. It beat slowly and peacefully. Thump-dum, thump-dum. And here, in the small cabin, beat another heart, just as big, just as hot. The heart of the guardian of the glass forest. Hagrid took a sip of tea, bit off half an eclair, and winked at Fang. "Right then, mate. Let's sleep. Tomorrow's a new day. And looks like the weather's finally gonna be fine." He extinguished the light, leaving only the reflections of the fire to dance on the walls, and the cabin plunged into a cozy, warm slumber, guarding the peace of the vast magical world beyond its walls.